Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're really excited about today's topic and conversation. My name is Melvin Hines, and I'm the co-founder and CEO. And we will be jumping in just a second. We're just going to allow a couple more people to come on in. But in the meantime, feel free to share where you are coming in from. Oh, Las Vegas. Wow. Texas, Colorado. I think we got the four corners of the country covered here. Well, it's really amazing to see so many people already here. We think this will be a really fruitful conversation. So I'll go ahead and jump on in. Today's conversation is called Meeting Basic Needs. What are students actually asking for? And just to start off, we'll just provide a couple of housekeeping um, items for those of you all. I know typically tend to ask these questions. So first off, the recording and materials we'll be happy to share with you all afterwards. You should be able to see those in your inbox within the next day or two. And if you do have any questions for our presenters, our panelists here, just feel free to use there should be a Q&A button that you can press, and that will allow you to ask those questions, and we want to make sure it's an engaging conversation discussion. So we're certainly inviting you all to share all the questions and thoughts and ideas that you have as part of this conversation here as well. Before we jump in, just wanted to share a little bit about Upswing and myself. Upswing, we work with colleges and universities to help improve the persistence rates and ultimately the graduation rates of online students, non-traditional students all across the United States. And we're excited that to date we've helped prevent over 75,000 students from dropping out of school. And we really try and do this by focusing on those students who are your adult learners, your online students, students who are working well in college. And you'll see a lot of these themes, a lot of these refrains as we talk today about today's topic as well. Because, of course, those are some of the issues and challenges that affect our students the most. In fact, as you can see here, when we think about those different hurdles and challenges that students are going through, it doesn't just stop with academics. A lot of times people talk about, the struggles with, different types, different classes, certain courses, things like that. But what we know is that for a lot of students, especially today's students, many of the challenges go well beyond that and happen well before that. And so, as you can see here, we certainly see that several students are dealing with, how do I make sure that I'm a good student while also taking care of my family needs? How can I make sure that I'm supporting myself from a mental health perspective? A lot of students have uncertain and unexpected challenges that take place with them as well. Things like homelessness, needing food and housing, and a lot of those things we'll be talking about as well today. And that's a big part of the reason why basic needs support is ever increasing and is certainly more urgent today than it's been over the course of the last few years. As we've seen more of our students from adult learner populations, first generation, certainly seeing themselves having to deal with some of these challenges while also being in that challenge of trying to be a student as well. And part of where our data is coming from that we're talking about today is actually from many of those same conversations. Before we jump into specifically the data, I wanted to just share with everyone how we come to some of that data that we have here. So, Anna is one of our tools that we have here at Upswing. Via Anna, we work with colleges and institutions to proactively outreach to students and send them reminders and updates. And then we also want to ask them about different challenges that they're dealing with, so that we can point them to the right resources. And we take that data and that insight to make sure that we're supporting students all the way from their first day on campus to graduation. But we also want to make sure that we're sharing with the partners that we work with the data that we're learning, the insights that we're gleaning from them. And each year we put out an Anna Insight report that shows some of the larger trends that we're noticing. Our 2025 Anna Insight report is actually available on our website if you would like to see a little bit more of some of those details. But as part of this webinar series, what we've wanted to do is highlight some of those specific insights that we have focused on within that insight report. Here is a larger list of some of those insights that we plan to talk through and talk about over the course of this year's webinar series. But the one that I wanted to really highlight today is insight number 2, and that is that demand for basic needs and why that's growing. As far as the interactions that we've had with students so far, we've noticed that those community resources, those community needs have increased significantly from fall 2024 to spring 2025. And we're noticing that some of those common things that pop up are things like needing help with paying bills, needing support for food resources, as well as housing resources. More and more students are reaching out, asking for and seeking help within those different regards. And what we've also noticed is that many of the students who are considering whether or not it's worth it for them to stay in school are having to make those decisions because they're trying to choose between those college expenses and certain basic need supports. We've also seen in our conversations with Anna is that stigma tends to play a role in preventing those students from raising their hand and telling others that these are the challenges that they're dealing with as well. One thing that I wanted to really double click on is that as we've thought about how students get to their breaking points and the challenges that are really kind of taking them to places they haven't thought about before, we've really seen in the fall of 2025 these escalations increase. And an escalation, our definition of that is if we have received some sort of notification from a particular student indicating something that we know that the school needs to know urgently about. It could be something like a housing insecurity need, a suicidal risk, emotional distress. And so here is just a look at some of those major escalations that took place just last semester. As you can see, housing insecurity was actually a full quarter of all the ANA escalations that we actually ended up dealing with. But we've also seen some of these other ones pop up as well. And maybe some of these feel familiar to you all. Maybe they're a bit surprising to others that are here on the call. One of the biggest ones that we really want to make sure that we're staying in front of are when students are dealing with things like emotional distress, suicidal risks. Those are things that we know that students can potentially not come back from. And so we want to make sure that we're supporting them holistically as well. And that's a big part of the reason why I'm excited for us to have this conversation here today. These here are just some of the examples of these conversations that we've seen come in. And so this isn't, I wanted this to be here because this isn't just, us talking about this from a theoretical perspective. And we didn't want to just bring the folks here who we have here in this conversation to talk about it from a theory perspective, but because we're seeing these real conversations take place day in and day out. Students, as you can see here on the left, looking for affordable housing, or as you can see here in the middle, looking for help with groceries or financial aid help. These are just a few of those examples that students are reaching out to, a lot of times confidentially, anonymously, not wanting to raise their hand and let other people know that these are the challenges that they're dealing with, but they're dealing with them just the same. And so with that being said, I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today because it brings two luminaries who are very well versed in both of the conversations of higher education as well as basic needs support, and really wanting to have a conversation where we can bring both of those areas together and talk about how we can help to support more of our students as they're going through these challenges here. And so I first want to introduce Dr. Adrian Hagerbrook. Dr. Hagerbrook is a strategic advisor, systems thinker, and equity driven innovator with over 3 decades of executive leadership in higher education, nonprofit, and social impact sectors. He has committed this career to expanding access, equity, and opportunity by leading innovative initiatives that align vision, strategy, and measurable impact. Throughout his career, Dr. Hagerbrook has held several roles at nationally recognized institutions and organizations, leading enterprise level strategy, equity centered change initiatives, and strategic partnerships. He's the founder and principal of Quintessentia Ventures, a consultancy dedicated to equipping social sector organizations with the tools and strategies needed to achieve meaningful impact, optimize performance, and build long term capacity. So, Dr. Hagerbrook, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Great. Thank you. Glad to be here.
And next, I'm excited to introduce you all to Tim Lytle. Tim has served as the Director of Business Development at Single Stop since August of 2022, where he leads efforts to expand the organization's reach through new sectors and strategic partnerships. His work focuses on building innovative collaborations that connect more individuals and families to critical financial and social resources. Under his leadership, Single Stop experienced its most impactful year in 2025, serving more than 76,000 individuals and identifying over $900 million in potential benefits eligibility. The organization is now on pace to surpass $1 billion in benefits eligibility identified in 2026, further advancing its mission to reduce poverty and strengthen economic mobility across the country. So, welcome aboard, Tim. We're excited to have you here on this panel as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Melvin. Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
So, I first wanted to start with Dr. Hagerbrook here. And I wanted to just ask you a question from your perspective. What are students most urgently asking their institutions for right now when it comes to basic needs support? And how would you say that has changed over the past few years?
Yeah. I think a couple of positions in which I'd state. First, I think what we're seeing and have seen over a period of time is where the student thought it may have been his or her or their singular issue. And now we're beginning to see and have seen institutions adopt this as a strategy, as an approach to really deal with basic needs. I remember a time, from an institutional perspective where, if you had a food pantry or if you had something like a clothing wardrobe room, that it was something that was a found closet someplace, an empty space in the dean of students office or a pickup spot someplace. Now we're seeing infrastructure being built on campuses and resources in collaboration with community to really address these needs. The other thing that I've seen over time is from the student perspective, in terms of how institutions or organizations address basic needs. Over time, there's been a proliferation of the need for personalization and customization. And so it's easy for us to bucket basic needs. But far too often, what we're seeing in the student or from the student or the learner perspective is that their lives don't fit in buckets. And in fact, many of their needs have implications across the spectrum of basic needs. And in some cases, they iterate and they're enduring. And so it's not just solving a point problem or, sort of a point solution. You're actually needing to invest in a systemic approach during the student journey.
Right. And that's something we've seen as well over the course of our last few Audit Insights reports, especially originally making it where students would just select one option because you're thinking about this more as a point solution, but recognizing as time has passed that students are a lot of times needing help with one particular need because of another particular need that also falls within those basic needs buckets.
Correct.
And so that holistic perspective is really important there. I also would love to just hear your perspective on how those challenges are either similar or different for students who are at, say, HBCUs and minority serving institutions.
Yeah, yeah. And so the real answer is that the needs the needs are no different. But where it comes into play are often the structural inequities that we see. So it's the structural inequities, the student demographics related to HBCUs, and institutional resource constraints. And so this is sort of how that lays out.
Mm.
Um, Often, and I want to be careful that we're not treating HBCUs as a monolith. But often what we see at institutions like HBCUs and MSIs and others that are serving high or disproportionate number of students, or predominantly their student demographic constitutes, is that more times than not, our HBCUs are enrolling more students who come from low-income households or are first generation, or come from communities that have a lower accumulation of wealth. And essentially, what that translates into is often there's a correlate between higher basic needs issues, especially around housing and food. And so, as you talked about that interplay between more than one of those dynamics, that's where we often see that. There's often the other thing that you see is often a higher reliance on financial aid and work. And so the need for work, and again, these have compounding and complicated implications for that student's experience. Oftentimes, the family financial independence or interdependence, and so it's not just here, take this and go off to college. There's often that interplay and interdependence between the financial issues at home and the financial needs and issues in the college environment. And then the institutional resource constraints. Often, many times, our HBCUs, not all the time, but in many cases, our HBCUs have received less philanthropic dollars and less public funding. And so
Mm.
really thinking about the distribution of those funds and those resources really put that in context. And then the last thing that I'll just mention in this way is that HBCUs often have a strong embedded culture. Both of my children went to HBCUs, and so they talk about this culture of care, and oftentimes those are informally distributed through and to students. And so those are things that often, you don't find funding for, or don't come up in
Right.
policy conversations or decisions. And so those informal networks frequently compensate for the limited resources. And as we know, sometimes because of the degree of personalization and customization, you don't scale that.
Yeah, that's powerful. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Certainly have seen that with our some of our partners and the ways in which those supports are taking place on those campuses as well. Um, Tim, I wanted to bring you into the conversation, especially as we talk about the ROI impacts and particularly how we're wanting to make sure that we're doing good work, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because it helps support the overall mission of these colleges and institutions as well. Um, how have you seen at Single Stop food insecurity, housing instability, financial stress, influence persistence, and ultimately the stopout rates of institutions directly?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think it's kind of grim, some of this to talk about in pretty stark sort of financial terms for institutions, but I think we have to. I think we owe
Hmm.
it to them. Not only, sort of I don't know if you want to call it an attack on people going to college or the value of it, affordability as an issue across the board, but the looming, enrollment cliff of just fewer young people of college age, right? And so we have to center sort of the ROI and the return on this. And the reason Upswing exists in a lot of ways, and certainly single stop in the higher ed space, is to get students retained and graduate, period, end of story. And we're at a point, through our sort of years of work here, where we're really at a really good point with some data. There's a couple things I can point to. One, it was Southern New Hampshire actually, who's recently become a partner of single stops, and that should signal to a lot of people if the big time, large, moneyed places are signing up for services and programs like this. If you're small, you should be thinking about it as well, because
Yeah.
they are. But anyway, they did a study, and basically, it's a few years old, but students who receive basic needs support were 15.5% more likely to persist and graduate. We are about to what? I'm sorry.
Oh, I just said, wow, that's
Oh,
impressive.
yeah, yeah. I hopefully even just as impressive as we are close. I can't say who, but we're going to publish a case study from one of our partners, a community college, decent sized community college in the Northeast, but proving out and showing a 13% increase in retention for accessing single stop. And of course, I'm here to plug and talk about single stop, but a lot of this stuff is around support and basic needs. So it is um, for an institution. I know a lot of folks on this call are probably maybe more so in the day to day. Of course, they care about survival and all of that stuff, but we
Mhm.
don't have the dean on here or a board of trustees who are probably laser focused on that.
Yeah.
But little investment goes a massive way towards ensuring retention, which leads to obviously dollars for the entire institution.
Melvin, do you mind if I glove
Yeah,
onto
go
what
ahead.
Tim was saying? Tim's absolutely correct, and what I'd love to add is a couple other measures of ROI that we're beginning to see. So one, I think the point that Tim was just making in terms of higher completion rates and things like that for the students that you're serving, that also translates into not just more revenue for the institution, but greater capacity building within the organization and institution to actually facilitate basic needs and other issues and concerns related to students and student success in some sustained ways versus ad hoc. The other piece that we're beginning to see, and there's a convergence of research that's really indicating this now, is that the quote, the ROI on student persistence and student success actually is translating into greater economic mobility as well. And so when you think about addressing basic needs from an emotional or psychological perspective, it lessens the stress burden that is often carried by students because of the basic needs issues and challenges. And so you mitigate and even potentially eliminate some of those stress barriers. We know that belonging and those kinds of things, the deeper affinity to an institution or an organization actually factors into stronger persistence and completion rates. And then the other piece is and through that stabilization of and mitigating some of those issues of stress, um, it also brings about the potential for greater cash stability or financial stability, which in turn translates into being able to leapfrog into economic mobility versus backpedaling in that regard. And so you're starting from a greater perspective of assets than you are from a deficit or debt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've all heard um the talk about, students who are stopping out, maybe ultimately dropping out because of, a last minute emergency, car broke down, something like that, ended up being the nail that broke the camel's back. Um, but what we've also seen time and time again are some of those harrowing moments on the other side, where just that infusion of something small can mean something big for so many students. I remember we were visiting one institution, one HBCU actually, and they were talking about how many of the people were there helping to take care of some of the students' kids while they were going to class because they weren't able to, find emergency childcare support or find someone who could help them to balance that during those time periods, and that made all the difference in terms of them, either deciding to stop out or actually thinking that they actually have the willpower and ability to continue on to the next semester and the next year. So those little steps along the way, which are part of that basic needs umbrella, can really go a long way for sure. I actually, there was a question that came in, and I was going to mention this earlier. I forgot. If you do have any questions for Dr. Hagerbrook or for Tim Lytle here, feel free to use that Q&A button down below. We'd certainly love to have you all jump in and participate in the conversation as well. I see in the Q&A there is one question here. This may be a chicken and egg question, but are institutions of higher education being seen as a place to address basic needs because the institutions have noticed a gap in community resources, or because students have turned to the institution for support first, and those institutions are expanding to meet those requests?
I, I could take that to start. I think, Dr. Hager touched on it earlier around most of the institutions now have some sort of basic needs infrastructure in place. It's funny, when I started in 2022, there were still schools we would call into that we would say, how are you addressing students' needs? And they would say, what, like, you mean like the bursar's office? Like they weren't even thinking in the same universe. Um, what we have seen is, I think some of it is students, just pure necessity. Some of it is students pushing, saying, "Hey, I need help with X, Y, and Z." But I think a lot of these schools are sort of seeing what's going on, just in our society, sadly. And it is a struggle, much more of a struggle for so many more people than it has been, as long as I can remember. And so, uh, I think some of it's organic, some of it's driven by the students. But as I kind of touched on, it's in a way, and I know schools don't often think this way, it's competitiveness in a way, because if you are a prospective student and you're looking at cost, which people are now on everything, and you're seeing cost X amount per year or whatever, but they're going to provide me, counseling, mental health, basic needs support, and they're very organized in it, and they show me how it's going to work. That's an easy choice between two equals when you have that level of support. So I think a lot of it is competitiveness and pure necessity for these institutions.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said, Tim. I think the other part to add to this is that institutions are seeing addressing student basic needs as a core part of their student success strategy. And so to the question that was asked in the Q&A, I think it's a confluence of both. Looking at it from a higher ed perspective, if you think of the trajectory of higher education, one going from, only for the elite to really opening and broadening institutes of higher education for greater access. Then higher ed realized, well, we've opened the doors, but we still have pipelines of students who are not making it through to commencement, to graduation, to completion. And so the completion agenda really became paramount in the higher ed space. But in order to really achieve that completion agenda, you begin to understand that the access that we're creating for students and learners to come to the institution, now we're seeing these needs needing to be addressed as part of our course completion strategy. The other piece that I would add to this as well is the way that institutions of higher education looked even 10 years ago are not the same. And so, now we've created greater access, not just to physically be on campuses, but we've created digital and virtual environments where these are our students. And so our students are also, regardless of geography, are facing the very same issues that we're talking about relative to basic student needs. And so as we're seeing the demographics shift on our campus, and I'm not just talking about racial or ethnic demographics, I'm talking about age, we're talking about geography, we're talking about a whole host of demographics. We're seeing the greater need around basic needs because higher education is touching communities and touching learners in ways that it never did before.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, institutions have certainly shifted and adjusted quite a bit over the course of the last decade or so. Um, what we also know is that funding has also shifted and adjusted. And so to really kind of jump into one of the big elephants in the room, uh, how are you, Dr. Hagerbrook, from the perspective of some of the executives who have been at some of these institutions that have had to deal with some of these underlying shifts, and also Tim, as someone who is seeing this on the other side, I would love to hear from both of you all. How are you seeing institutions come up with ways to support basic needs, find funding? We know, Title III, Title V, a lot of these major grants that were the mainstays have been demolished, if not outright eradicated in a lot of cases. So, what are you all seeing institutions do to make sure that the needs that these vulnerable students have don't also go away? Or well, the needs aren't going to go away, but that the funding for those needs don't go away as well.
Yeah. Uh, I'm seeing institutions use more of a braided funding strategy. There's not a single source approach anymore. And now that we're seeing institutions building more infrastructure to address basic needs and as part of their completion agenda or their student success strategy, they're also being proactive in thinking about not just how do you fund it, but how do you sustain those resources and services. And so we're seeing, the use of federal and other public grants. We're seeing the use of state funding. So we're beginning to see more and more states who are addressing some of these needs at the state levels. We're seeing institutional budgets being reallocated or allocated or prioritized funding around student basic needs. The use of financial aid. And so how do you package in certain ways that really support student success? The other unique thing that we're seeing, which I think is, again, brilliant, is you're seeing a deeper investment in community partnerships and collaborations. And so, again, not just in the physical community, but also in ways that communities can serve the learners where they are. And then, of course, philanthropy. We are seeing some investments on the philanthropic side where funders are now saying we are directing our funds towards basic needs. And then the last is, these emergency funds that are often available or can be made available. And so it's a braided sort of funding mechanism that institutions are using, and they're calibrating based on some predictions or, how they're looking at forecasting for needs across their institution and across those who they serve.
Yeah, I'll add, I think Dr. Hagerbrook said the word priorities. I think it's lagging in smaller institutions. We're not seeing it as prevalent yet, but the larger institutions, as I already mentioned, the SNHUs, the huge, well-funded state schools and systems, it's more of a priority. And therefore, the conversation with us, especially because our costs, our fees are not what you would call exorbitant. It's less of we're waiting on a grant, a specific grant or this or that, and it's part of the priority, and therefore the money is there. And so I'm not so deep and to know exactly every single place it's coming from, but we are seeing that trend again, lagging with the smaller ones. But I think, especially when you're not, some things are expensive, some things are not, but if it's made a priority, usually money can be found in not every situation, but when you're dealing with institutions with some level of wealth, once it's a priority, it's a non-issue at that point and it's funded.
Yeah, and Tim, I'm glad that you mentioned the cost piece here because uh, I think this really dovetails with the earlier question that we had, as well as what Dr. Hagerberg was talking about with the community resources. What I really like about part of Single Stop's efforts and their work is to say, hey, these resources exist in a lot of cases in local communities. What we want to make sure is happening is that the burden isn't 100% on the institution, but instead, we're wanting to make sure that all students have an understanding that they're not alone and that whether it's from your institution, from your local city, from your state, you can find those resources available. You just want to talk a little bit about how that tends to operate in practice?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much we can talk about, like meeting students where they are, making it easy and
Mhm.
accessible. I think we touched on it earlier a little bit. Non-traditional students, students maybe not directly on campus, whereas back in the day, you showed up and yeah, there's the street with everything on it. Go right over there, and they'll help you out. May not be the case, and so just again, obviously here to pump up single stop, but just turning to somebody who's an expert in that, and that's what we are. Anytime a school, and we don't see it anymore. I saw it 3 years ago. Well, we have a list of resources. Well, that's out of date. The second you hit enter, it's done, right? And
Yeah.
so not trying to become a basic needs technology platform as an institution. Why would you do that when there's
Right.
options like us and amazing things like Upswing out there? So yeah, that's how I would sum it up. Providing expertise to these institutions so they can do what they're good at.
Yeah. Can I add something to that? Tim, I love what you just shared. I think the other part of this is if you make it a priority and you make it a strategy, you also have a data strategy that goes along with it. And so utilizing data to inform your basic needs approach. And again, it doesn't mean that your intention is to serve the most. And so it's not, how do you aggregate this to say, well, 75% of our students need food, so we're only going to do, food. But it's to really discern what is it that we're seeing so that you can not only understand what is currently happening, but you can also do trends analysis as well. I said one of the questions in the Q&A is the question of, are we seeing anything different at community colleges versus four-year institutions? And I could hypothesize on what that might be, but therein lies, the data. So really having a data strategy that informs that, because it may be something that is very germane to the institution. And then the other piece that I'll bridge with what Tim just said from a single stop perspective to an upswing perspective is the point that I made earlier about the degree of sort of personalization and customization that our students are needing and that they are looking for. Is again, if we treat basic needs as a monolith and say this is all that we're doing, then are you really addressing basic student needs from the context of the population or populations that you're serving? So, if you don't know and you're doing an overwhelming amount on food insecurity,
Mhm.
but really the issue is housing or the issue is emotional or psychological, then you actually don't have an effective student success strategy.
Yeah, 100%. I remember there was a previous webinar that we were doing on this topic. It may have been you, Dr. Harbaugh. It was talking about this where, you know, at that point in time, mental health was sort of the big buzzword of the day, if you will. And I remember the conversation or the topic being that mental health itself isn't a silo, that a student might be under mental distress because they're dealing with financial pressures or because they just had a traumatic event happen at home or because they find themselves food insecure. Um, you know,
Mhm.
these things all happen together to create the experience that a student is going through at any given point in time. And so to, just create them as buckets and say, this is the bucket we're going to focus on could easily miss the larger picture there. Um, You talked about one of the questions that came in here from Elizabeth about the difference between basic needs trends for community colleges versus four-year universities. I know that in our on an insights report we talked about some of the things we're noticing there. But Tim, have you seen any major differences between community colleges and 4 years in your work?
It's funny, Dr. Hegerberg mentioned the data, and I didn't pull it, so I would refer to that. I think what I can say anecdotally, I think, is just potentially more non-traditional students. Again, I don't want to speculate, but you're going to have a higher percentage of students who are perhaps parents, right, or caregivers, or you name it, working full time, and so the needs are, of course, slightly different. Just I think to what was said, speaks to the need to have a wide strategy versus two or three things that you think of, and then you have students who are like, well, I don't need help with that. I have unique needs because of X, Y, and Z because I'm non-traditional or what have you. So
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think one other piece that I noticed in our report was funding, financial resources, financial aid resources. I think that for some of our community college students, either they don't know about or haven't qualified for or haven't checked to see if they qualify for a lot of those different types of either emergency aid resources or federally funded resources as well. And so we see those questions come up a lot more often among those community college students. I think than in our four-year universities as well.
Mm.
Well, I know that we're starting to come close towards the end of time. So also, please continue to share these questions. These are really good questions, everyone in the audience. Um, I wanted to talk about after institutions decide to add these resources. Um, we want to make sure that we're not, causing any undue harm. We want to make sure that we're not doing things in a way that allows us to be inefficient with our work. So I'd love to hear from both of you all about just some of the mistakes that you have seen in implementation, and what are some of the things that institutions, as they're thinking about deploying a strategy around basic needs support, that they can that you would advise them to avoid as they're thinking about going down that road.
I would say two things really come to mind. One is, we talk about building out the infrastructure, but I can't think of a good quip for it. But I guess letting perfect be the enemy of good, if that makes sense, right?
Mm,
You
Mhm,
know,
mhm.
countless times, well, we're working on getting a space. I'm like, space isn't going to change the students that are going to drop out this year. Like, I don't know what you're waiting for, and that's a little harsh, maybe, but waiting for a space, waiting for this, that, the other. Do research, trust who you've worked with in the past, and get something in place that could help students. And then I would say, what we found were truly the only well, two scenarios where it tends to not work out. Is one, alignment all the way up, right, and alignment, the people who are in the basic needs department who know this is going to work and help students make sure that those above them are aware of the potential impact in retention. If we retain this, even a fraction of what we think we're going to retain, it's well worth the cost, right? Because we will see that where there's a disconnect and then there's no funding, and that's it. And it's devastating for those in the program going, this is working incredibly. Our students are responding to it, if it's not sort of aligned all the way up. And then the other thing I would say is, we do a very good job of this. It's sort of out of the box marketing support. But buying a solution and sending an email, and that's it. I mean, those are the other scenarios where, if you don't do that, if you do the opposite of that and promote this, students respond, get help, succeed, right, persist. So I think, getting something, kind of putting it on the shelf, if you will, or not fully promoting promoting it, because in the end of the day, it's really up to the institution how much you want a solution or solutions. How well they're going to work for you is how many students and the right students are accessing them.
Mm.
Yeah. I would offer three or four really quick points. One is it's got to be strategy. It's got to be strategic. It's got to be a priority, and you've got to really level this as a sustained infrastructure, not an episodic. Oh well, we've got to decrease funds, and so we're going to take away from basic needs. The second is don't don't falter on looking and developing the data. Let the data inform positioning, strategy, and forecasting. How do you better understand where and what we need to do in a way that really supports the student success model and the students and the learners that are at the institution. The third is you got to listen to the user, listen to the student. You've got to figure out ways to co-design and co-evaluate the services that you're providing, so that you're ensuring that it's actually meeting the needs of learners. And that could be done, in a complementary way of, there could be, sort of the hard data over here, and then the qualitative approach that you're looking for. And so you also bring all of those data into the cabinet meeting. This isn't just the chief student success officer or the dean of students purview. This is part of the institutional strategy. And the last thing that I would just offer is don't make the mistake of fragmentation. That the cover sits over here, this service sits over here, this service sits over here. Because if you do that, east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. And that student and the learner that you're targeting for student success will fall through the crack.
I like that. I would completely agree with what both of you all said there. It reminds me of a conversation I had with one school at one point in time, where they were saying, our students just don't use the resources. So I asked, oh, what exactly did that look like? And they were creative strategies. I remember one being that they printed T-shirts with the phone numbers to the different departments for whatever it is that you were looking for. So food pantry, this number, all on the back of the T-shirt. And they were like, and it still didn't work. And I was thinking, wow, that was a very expensive strategy. But you're right. Meeting the student where they are is a very critical component there. There was a conversation that took place between Anna and a student. I remember towards the end of COVID, where the whole conversation was just about making sure that you fill out your FAFSA, and that student said, I filled it out, but I'm not planning to attend next year. And clearly they thought at that point in time that Anna was just a bot and that no one would actually reply back. And so when the question was asked, what are some of the reasons why, you ended up finding out that there was one issue, then there was another issue, then there was a third issue. And it turned out that it was, they couldn't get in contact with their instructor. Suddenly they were at home because of COVID. They couldn't figure out how to get in touch with people to let them know they couldn't attend their classes because their kids were also at home. And those kids needed to use the laptop for their work, and they got laid off. And so you started to find out that, wow, again, there are all these little small things that end up being the decision that school just isn't right for me, or maybe I'm just not right for school. And fortunately we were able to help navigate many of those challenges, and she ended up re-enrolling in the fall semester. But it's one of those things where, if you didn't just ask that one simple question, why, you would never have uncovered many of these pieces. And so really trying to take that approach of ensuring that, like you mentioned, there's a co-design with the user in mind as well, will ensure that those practices are supportive, and that more and more of those students end up getting to that finish line.
Yeah, Melvin, I'll just give you one quick anecdote that supports exactly that piece around the need for co-design. So at a previous institution, the institution had set up a food pantry, and they set it up in the community. I'm sorry, in the campus center, which is like the most common place for people to be. This was a place-based strategy,
Mm.
and they were finding out that the place wasn't getting a lot of usage. And they were like, gosh, why? And so they started talking to students and they said, because all the other students are there. They'll see me going into that facility. The other piece of reason why co-design is really helpful is then, many places have where you can access and swipe with your card, your student ID card. Well,
Mhm.
again, students weren't accessing it. They go to ask why. It's because every time I swipe, my name will pop up somewhere on a report. And they wanted to remain as anonymous as possible. They didn't want people,
Yeah,
the stigma that was associated with that. And so when you understand from a co-design perspective, from the beginning, you begin to get that kind of intelligence that actually helps to build a bigger and broader strategy.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Hagerbrook and Tim, I really appreciate both of you all for giving of your just time and insight, time and time again, to make sure that, especially in light of just some of the challenges with students adjusting to a new world and schools adjusting to a new world, that we're keeping basic needs at the core of that experience for all of our students. So I really appreciate both of you all taking time to just connect with us today. Um, and I also just wanted to share for you all that Upswing has actually started working with Single Stop to ensure that more and more students do have that ability to get those resources right where they are, and don't have to figure out where to go to get the answers to the questions that they have, and what that ends up looking like. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but some of the things that I was really impressed with Single Stop was the ability for students to be able to go in and see those resources, whether they're food resources or housing resources, by just typing in their zip code and seeing all the resources that are available for them. And then also being able to collect information on what benefits they might actually qualify for right there in their local community, so that they can say, oh, okay, this is something that could help me in my current situation, and it's completely confidential. I don't have to, as Dr. Hagerberg was mentioning earlier, go somewhere where everyone stares at me as I declare that I am needing, support for SNAP or housing or something like that. And then finally, what I really like about Single Stop is the information, as Dr. Hagerbrook mentioned earlier, that is now at the fingertips of the administrators of the institution, so that you can start to see trends, understand those trends, and decide how best to support your students moving forward. So, just wanted to give you guys a little bit of that insight into the partnership with Upswing and Single Stop. And other than that, I just wanted to say thanks to both you, Dr. Hagerbrook, as well as you, Tim Lytle, for joining us today. And if anyone is interested in learning more about the insights that we've gleaned over the course of the 2024-2025 school year, you can use this QR code to download the ONA Insights report. We'll be doing another ONA Insights report this year for the 25-26 school year. And other than that, we appreciate your time today, and hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
All set?
I think so.
Okay. I got to
Very
rush
good.
back to the airport.
Oh,
Great.
gotcha. Thanks so much for your time again, Dr. Harvard.
No, absolutely. All right. Thanks all.
Take care.
Thanks. Take care.